Hello everybody, welcome back to class. Sorry, just off camera for 1 second. Okay. All right, welcome back everybody. Hello. So we just got less than a minute and we're going to start our meeting. Today is review session day, so we're just going to take time to go through our study guide and notes. But welcome everybody, good to see you guys. Ashley, Amanda, Nick, Dylan, welcome back. Hello everybody. So I'm just pulling up my version of the study guide here. I got my copy handy, and we'll just go right into it in a moment here. But welcome back, good to see everybody. Hope you had a good weekend and everything else. I just kind of took time to relax, do a bunch of grading, hang out with Peach, the usual stuff basically. So anyways, welcome again. Here it is, 1 o'clock. So I'm going to get our class started. Welcome to the review session. As you guys know, today our schedule is all about going over the notes and topics in the class. Let me start with a quick question, okay? Have any of you guys happened to notice my titanium message on Saturday where I sent the study guide? Just let me know if you can confirm that you've received that study guide. And hello everybody, hi Juliana. I just got back to some of you guys by email. Okay, good, so perfect. That study guide is what we're going to use to kind of guide our meeting today. We're going to go back through all the notes in the class, and I'm just going to try and get your guys' assistance so that we can, have the most efficient use of our time today. So, welcome one and all, as usual. If you're here and you're in the meeting, make sure to just leave a comment behind at some point, and I'll use that if ever I need it for purposes of attendance. Okay. So what I'd like you guys to do, if you have your own copy of the study guide, to pull it up and use it as a reference. I mean, I'm going to guide us through the topics, so I guess in a sense it's not absolutely vital for you to have it, but it's nice to have it as a way of comparing the order of topics in the study guide to the presentation that we're having here during the review session. So next class period, that's Wednesday, March 10th, so 48 hours from now. That's when you guys will get your midterm exam. The distribution of the midterm exam is going to be much similar to the quiz. You're just going to receive the document through Titanium right around class time, just before 1 p.m. And then you'll have a full class period until 2:15 p.m. to complete your answers and send me back your attached document. So that's really it. This week on Wednesday, there's no class lecture. It's just taking the test. And today there's also no lecture, but we are having a review session, just going back over everything that we've studied to this point. So, okay, I'm pulling up my study guide and I'm looking at our notes and topics. So while I ask these questions, see if you can just hit me with a quick answer, okay? And while you're thinking about the questions and answers, I'll also support you with the information on my end, okay? But I like the students to participate and engage during review sessions. I don't so much prefer if it's just the professor reteaching all the material again. So I kind of want you guys to be able to step up and showcase a little bit of your knowledge, and I'll help meet you in the middle when there's something that I think is not as clear as it needs to be, or if I need to, add details, then I'll step in and do that. For the most part, I want you guys to help yourself and your classmates to come up with the right information, and I'll just make sure that everything's correct. So first thing, let's start at the beginning. And we're going to try to do this lightning round so that we can get through as much of it as we can, right? But my first question for you is, going back to the beginning of the semester, what's a good or a bad critical thinker? Who thinks they could tell me the general idea of what it is to be a good critical thinker, or on the other hand, what it is to be a bad critical thinker? And once we get something in our chat, then review session is on, and we'll just continue through all the notes until we get to the end. So let me ask that question. Plenty of us are here, so they say 2 heads are better than 1. Well, what about when you have 34 or 40? We've got a lot of people, so we should all be able to do this. What is a good critical thinker or / bad critical thinker? Let's hear that one. And then that'll just kind of get us back on topic, and we'll work through the notes from there. Okay, Brenda, perfect. Good critical thinker, a person that would not believe a claim unless it's based on good evidence or a good argument. Perfect, yes. Also, there's another part of that. A good critical thinker, when they make claims to other people, So when they're not receiving claims, but when they're putting them to others, they also make sure to provide good evidence or good arguments to back their claims up. So like a two-way street, when the information's coming in, you consider whether it's based on good evidence or arguments before you believe it. And when you're putting information out there, you give those good arguments and reasons to others to back your claims up. And then, very good. Bad critical thinker, while you guys are thinking of that, I'll just let you know it's a type of person that's the opposite. So that's the person who will believe information or claims that are not based on good reasons or arguments or evidence. And when they make claims to others, do not have the ability to defend or produce good arguments for those claims. Okay, so we want to be good critical thinkers, the kind of people who don't just believe anything that we hear, but only the things that can somehow be supported by legitimate good reasons and evidence, and the kind of people who can defend the things that we say to people by justifying them with arguments and reasons. Okay, so not to worry, Edward, welcome back. We're just going through our review session right now, and I have another question. So I'm looking at the study guide, and I'm looking at each different item in it, going down line by line. So item number 2 from chapter 8, what is an argument? Let me know that, the formal definition of an argument. It's a set of certain things. It's a set of what things? How many and what are those pieces? That's the next question. Okay, perfect, Danny. An argument is a set of two, well, let me correct one thing, actually. It's not totally perfect. What you wrote is that it's a set of 2 or 3 sentences. Ah, no. It is a set of 2 or more sentences. So like greater than or equal to 2 sentences. So there could be 2, or there could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, any finite number, but it has to be 2 or more. So like, you remember the old math symbol? There's this many sentences in every argument. Greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so like, that means that in every argument, there's a minimum of 2 sentences. Now, in every single argument, one of the parts, correct, Chelsea, is the conclusion. And all the other statements aside from that are the premises. Now, I've got this question. What is the conclusion and what is the premise? What's the definition of those parts of an argument? So that's my next question. You've told me that every argument is a set of 2 or more sentences with one conclusion and at least one premise. So the conclusion is the sentence that you're trying to what? And the premises are what? Tell me definition of the word conclusion and premises. Let me know. We're just breaking down all these definitions and getting to the root meaning of them. So I just need to know what is a conclusion and what are premises. Just let me know. Okay, perfect. So Brenda, you're telling me premises are the reasons that support or give evidence to the claim. Yes. And the conclusion, though, I need to know that too. The conclusion is, what is it? You told me what the premises are, but let's not forget the other part. All of you have to participate. So like, you can't just passively watch the screen and look for the answers. You have to contribute, otherwise we won't get through all the information. So to help yourself, give me the answer as soon as you can. What is the conclusion of an argument? You have the notes. I mean, it's either in your notes, the memory, or the book, or all 3. So from whatever source you can possibly find it, you got to go and give me the answer. Go out and get it and put it in this chat. What is the conclusion of an argument? The whole point of the argument is about the conclusion. So we're trying to do what with these arguments? Are you there? Okay, yeah, Chelsea. The whole point of making an argument is to try and convince or persuade somebody that the conclusion is true. Yes. So the conclusion is the sentence that you are trying to prove to be true. The whole reason you'd make an argument is you're making a case for the conclusion, and the premises are the evidence that supports it. So that's good. Brenda, you define premises, but I would always think you define conclusion first, because premises are evidence for the conclusion. So without knowing what they're evidence for, it's not the most precise definition. So we got to say them both. Okay, perfect. So next up, what is the definition of the word truth? What does it mean when a sentence is true? Tell me that. For a sentence to be true, that means what? Okay, good, Dylan. When what the sentence says matches the facts of reality. Correct. So if I told you that I'm wearing a polo shirt, this is a true statement because it's a statement of fact. It's a statement which matches the fact. If I told you that I was wearing a sweater, that is not a true statement right now because it's something I am saying, but the facts are not the same as what I'm saying. So a statement, a sentence that either a person writes or speaks could be true or false. When it's true, it conforms to reality and it mirrors reality. And when it's false, it says something that is not what's happening in the actual reality. Okay, so what's a belief then? Belief is the next term. So piggybacking off of the word truth, when does a person believe a sentence? What does it mean for one to think that to believe a sentence? Correct, Micah, when you think that the sentence is true. So a person might believe that there's life out there in outer space. Another person may say, nope, God created us in his image. He didn't put aliens out there, so there's no such thing as those extraterrestrial life forms. These are two different people with two different beliefs. One thinks that that statement is like a mirror of the facts and reality. Another person says, no, there's no such thing as that. So what you think is true or not is what you believe, okay? That's good. Thanks, everybody, for your help. And we're just going to continue on the same theme. So what are some conclusion indicator words? Who knows some of those? These are words which indicate that it is the conclusion next that you're stating in the argument. So this word just precedes the conclusion sentence. And these words are words like what? Okay, very good. So you're telling me therefore, in conclusion, thus, hence, ergo, consequently. It follows that. That's all good. Okay, perfect. Thus is, and therefore is probably the most widely used, but all of these are synonymous and they're all interchangeable. So you have a grab bag of options with conclusion indicator words. Let's see. There's a lot of clouds in the sky and the forecast says that there's a chance of rain. So therefore I will bring an umbrella, like something along those lines. Therefore is a word that I voice just before I tell you what I have concluded based on some reasons that I've given. Okay, so good enough. What are some premise indicator words? Now I'm asking about words which are stated and voiced prior to the assertion of a premise in an argument. So like evidence words, words that mean here's a piece of reasons or evidence for something else. So premise words include things like what? Okay, good. Since, given that, because, due to the fact that, based on, and those are all good examples. Assuming that would be another example. Good, Hinnock? Yes. Okay, so just we know what premise and conclusion indicator words are. Now I'm asking about some different types of sentences. Let me know what's an imperative sentence. What kind of sentence is that? Imperatives. What do you know about this concept? What is an imperative? Yes, they are commands, exactly. So there's an unlimited number of possible imperatives. If I say, get on the ground, close the door, drop the weapon, whatever. These are commands. I don't know why I always seem to like zap over to like authoritative commands given by like a law enforcement officer or somebody, but even in everyday life, to hold the door, hold my bag, just whatever. These are all commands. They're stated in the imperative, and that's another type of sentence. Okay, what's an interrogative? Interrogative sentences are what kind? Let's remember, they're not commands, but the interrogatives, just this is a fancy word for questions. That's right, questions of all kinds. So what day is it? Where am I? Who's the president? How many cars do you own? Where's the bathroom? No, Amanda, the interrogatives are questions. What you're thinking of, Amanda, are the expressive kinds of sentences we call exclamations sometimes. But I didn't really insist on you knowing about them because I think they're not as clearly defined and examples are a little bit weirder. So I just stuck with imperative, interrogative, and then the next one, assertoric. So what is an assertoric sentence? Anybody know that? It's not a question. Okay, no problem. Thanks, Amanda. But an assertoric sentence is not a question, nor is it a command. It is a what? It is a different sentence. What is an assertoric sentence? Okay, yeah, Nick, it's a sentence that is either true or false, correct. So we say that that is a sentence that has a truth value, which is, an assertion, a claim, and it's either a true or a false claim compared to the facts of reality. Okay, those are the only kind of sentences that are used within arguments as premises and conclusions. So it's actually important to notice that those are fundamental to logic and reasoning, assertions and assertoric sentences. Okay, so here's an important question. 100% I will ask this question. I'm not even going to just be ambiguous about it because it's such a fundamental concept of logic and critical thinking that you need to know it, and therefore I can't let it go. So what is a deductively valid argument? If you can tell me the definition of the deductively valid argument. What is that? Deductively valid argument. It's a certain type of argument. What does this mean? Okay, Brenda, if all of the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. Very good. And Chelsea, you've added emphasis to must with all caps. That's good because that's important to the definition. If all the premises reasons are true, then the conclusion must be. So deductively valid arguments contain information in the premises, which if we assume it is true, forces or guarantees that the conclusion must be true as well. There's many different examples, but let me think. All human beings have parents. I mean, like biological parents. I know some people are just left to the orphanage, and I'm just talking about the fact that there's two human beings that conceived the child. All human beings have parents. I don't know, Tiger Woods. Hopefully his legs are getting better. But anyway, Tiger Woods is a human being. And therefore, conclusion, Tiger Woods has parents. It is a deductively valid argument. And why? Because if these two claims are true, this has to be true. Because this says all. It doesn't say most. It doesn't say some. It says 100% all human beings have parents. So if that is true, and if it's also true that Tiger Woods is a member of the category of human beings, then he would have parents because, as claimed in premise 1, all human beings do. So, I mean, that's a deductively valid argument. One thing noticed about arguments, and this is important too, when you're writing arguments out, you have to display these arguments in standard form. So you would not ever write this argument as though it was just like a paragraph where, the first and second premises all occur on the same continuous horizontal line. No. With an argument in logic, in standard form, you have to separate every sentence from every other one. So like when one sentence is done, it's like hitting the return key, jumping down below to the next available ledger line, and then entering the subsequent premise there. It makes it a little bit easier to remember the standard form if you number the premises like so, because the act of numbering reminds you that they're supposed to be listed in a list. Okay, so don't forget that, because points would get deducted when arguments are not written in standard form. Anyway, that's a deductively valid argument example. It's obviously not the only one, but it's just one that came to my mind, just freestyling on examples while we're talking. Okay, next I want to ask, what's a sound argument? Let me ask you this. What is a sound argument? What's the definition of soundness? What do you think? Just wait for it for a minute. Okay, so good, Dylan. It is a deductively valid argument where all the premises are true. And the thing is, you can have valid arguments where the premises are not all in fact true, as long as the conclusion is a logical consequence of the premises, like if they were true. So let's see. What could be an example of an argument that is valid but not sound? Well, yeah, that's the next question, actually. So what do you think? Let me hear anybody state out an example of a valid argument, but it's not sound. So it's got to be valid, meaning that the conclusion follows the premises, but it has to be not sound, meaning that not every premise is actually true. So some of you guys, you've already given examples like this in previous work that you've turned in, and maybe you have such an example on your mind or in your existing notes, but someone will be able to tell me, and then I'll put it up here for our review, a valid but not sound argument. So one easy method of generating an example like this is to just begin the argument with a false claim of all. Say all fill in the blank, but it's not true that all have that property. Like all men have short hair, or all women have long hair, or whatever, something like that that's not actually a true fact. And then you can simply complete the argument from there by plugging in information and content. So, well, Danny, you say humans have been to Mars. You should prefix the word humans, though, with the word all, so that we know that you're making the claim that all humans have been to Mars, because otherwise it's a bit ambiguous. If you say some have been to Mars, then it doesn't follow that one randomly chosen human name is a person who is in that category. But that's fine. So if I wrote your example, all humans have been to Mars, Danny, like I'm thinking you, my brother's also named Danny, but anyway, nice name. Humans have all been to Mars, Danny is a human, and therefore he's been to Mars. That would be valid but not sound because of the evident falsehood of premise 1, but it's still logically of the correct form to be valid. Good example. Dylan, all math teachers are over 7 feet tall, which we know is not true, but let's suppose. Mr. Smith is my math teacher, okay. I assume that there is a Mr. Smith. Maybe you're just making up a name. It's a generic sounding name, but let's suppose there's a man named Mr. Smith who's a math teacher. According to your argument, he's over 7 feet tall. That conclusion does logically follow from the two premises, but of course we have the first premise that's not true. And maybe even the second one. I don't know if you're telling the truth about Mr. Smith, your so-called math teacher, but you know, it's an example, so fair enough. Okay, guys, so those are the kind of examples that you would supply if you were asked to give an example of a valid but not sound argument. Now, what is a sound argument? Okay, well, like the previous case that I just wrote on the board would be one random example. All humans do have 2 parents, and Tiger Woods is a human, and so it does logically follow that he has 2 parents. Okay, well, I wouldn't call it a lie, Dylan. It's such a negative connotation with the word lie. Maybe we could just say you don't intend for this to be factual, so it's a fictional example or whatever. Lying is never good, but obviously sometimes with examples we just make do with what we have. Anyways, yeah, fib, little white lie, I guess. Innocent enough. So yeah, let's continue then. I guess we're good on soundness and validity. Inductive strength. Please tell me, what does it mean when an argument is inductively strong? That's a little different from deduction. So with an inductively strong argument, we have a different definition. What's the definition then? Inductively strong. Okay, very good. So if all the premises are true, then the conclusion is highly likely to be true. Highly likely to be true. It's not that it must be, but probably would be true. So when you have an inductively strong argument, the premises establish solid reasons for the conclusion to be true, but they don't absolutely guarantee it with necessity. So like if I say that I'm taller than Joe and Joe is taller than Bill, then I'm taller than Bill, and that has to be true if those are 2 true premises. But if I say something like, I've never pulled an all-nighter in my whole life, over 30 years of living, so I won't pull an all-nighter tonight. That's another kind of argument, and in that case, it's a conclusion which is a safe bet pretty much, given the track record stated in the premises, but there's no guarantee that the conclusion won't be true, or that it will be true, rather. It could turn out to be that for some reason I pull my first all-nighter tonight, breaking with precedent and tradition. So inductive arguments establish like a track record, a pattern that has been long-standing, and the conclusion usually just affirms that that same pattern will continue at least into one more case. So if we've had a presidential election every 4 years for 200-something years, which is true, then one might conclude inductively that in 2024 we will have another presidential election. Seems likely, doesn't it? But you know, strange things, I guess, could happen between now and 2024. What if we get hit by a meteor or something and it just destroys the whole government and banking system, and then we don't even have such a thing as an election? I mean, it's not likely, is it? But you don't know. Even the asteroid hypothesis, take that. No massive asteroid has struck the Earth and destroyed human civilization for hundreds of thousands of years, so it won't happen tomorrow. Can we guarantee this? No, but I guess if you have that much of a pattern that you're looking at, it's a safe assumption. So inductively strong. Now, what is an inductively weak argument? It would be just an argument where the conclusion is not even very probable based on those premises. So like if I say to you, I don't know, I found $1 on the ground yesterday while I was walking around, so I'll find $1 on the ground tomorrow if I go walking around again. This is a random thing, not likely to recur. There's no kind of law-like connection between me walking and me finding money. So if it happened once, that's not a very good premise to suppose that it will just happen reliably again. So usually with inductive arguments, you need like a backstock of a repeatable and consistent pattern, and then you just infer from that to the next case, okay? A weak inductive argument is one which is trying to predict something in the future, but based on weak evidence that's not likely to give evidence for it happening again. Okay, so next I'm asking about different forms of deductively valid argument, and that's the last part of chapter 8 review. So what is a disjunctive syllogism slash argument from elimination? Because these are just sort of two equivalent names for the same kind of argument. Let me know in the chat who can write down the format of the disjunctive syllogism. One type of deductive valid argument format. So how did that one go? Argument from elimination, disjunctive syllogism. Let's just see the form. So you'll remember this. Okay, Alexa, so the first premise of the argument would say either A or B, right? Yes. But we have more to add, so that's just one part of it, the first part, but that's a good start. So either A or B for some A and some B. And then where does the next statement of the argument go? Not B. Sorry, Blake, you say not A and therefore B. Well, see, Alexa, you're a little confused though, okay? Because what you're writing is not correct. Let's correct what you're writing. No, the second premise would not say if B, then C. You're mixing up the chain argument with the disjunctive syllogism. So the way it continues is this. Either A or B, not A, therefore B. Okay, that's one possible way it can play out. Oh no, it's okay, but this is why we do this, right? Got to make sure we're all clear. So it's good to make the mistakes or little errors now, then you're ready and prepared for the actual tests. This is no big deal. But look, disjunctive syllogism, either A or B. This is what we call a disjunction. It's an either or sentence. That's just the formal name of such a type of sentence, disjunctions. Either it will snow or there will be clear sky. Either I will buy a Ford or a Chevy car. Either the murderer used a pipe or a baseball bat to commit the crime. You know, so like an either or, two cases, one or the other. From there, the second premise of the disjunctive syllogism eliminates one of the two disjuncts. In this case, we've eliminated A, and therefore the conclusion is the other non-eliminated disjunct, in this example, B. Another possible way that this type of argument could play out, though, is to just deny or negate the alternative disjunct. So if we had either A or B, not B, then the conclusion would instead be A, okay? And it's also important to remember that the way that the argument from elimination goes, you cannot affirm one of the disjuncts here and then conclude with the negation of the other. Specifically, the second premise has to eliminate one of them, saying not one of them. And then we can conclude with the other one, since in logic we use the inclusive rather than the exclusive or. We are not in position to conclude that the other disjunct is false from affirming one, but from eliminating one, we may and we can conclude that the other one is true. Okay, so that's elimination disjunctive syllogism argument. Now I'm asking about the modus ponens. So now we'll get into all the if and then stuff. How does modus ponens go? It's one of the hypothetical syllogisms. There's three hypothetical syllogisms. There's modus ponens, modus tollens, and chain arguments. So we're just going to deal with those one by one. Let me ask, what is the modus ponens type argument? So let's just get that one out there. Modus ponens, sometimes known as affirming the antecedent. So how does it go? Okay, good, Danny. So if A, then B, followed by the second premise, A, and the conclusion, therefore, B. That's right. So modus ponens, this is disjunctive syllogism. Now that's all clear. Modus ponens argument is a hypothetical syllogism. So it starts with a hypothetical. It's an if-then sentence. If A, then B, followed by A, and therefore our conclusion is B. So like if I get vaccinated, then I can walk around without a mask. I got vaccinated, so therefore I can walk around with no mask. Actually, I mean, that's not necessarily true. I don't want to tell you false information. They say that even when you get vaccinated and you're in public, you should still wear a mask because you can, in theory, asymptomatically transmit the virus, even though you yourself can no longer develop serious symptoms or go to the hospital. You could, in theory, be a carrier. So, like, even when you get your vaccines, and I'm hoping some of you guys will get them soon, you're still supposed to practice mitigation strategies in public. But, okay, let me change the example. If you get the vaccine, then you can gather with other people that are vaccinated and not wear masks. And that's true. They told the CDC today released guidance for vaccinated individuals. So when you're fully vaccinated and you're with other people, you can gather in groups and people don't have to, distance or wear masks. So suppose one got vaccinated, then they can hang out with other people that are also vaccinated with no masks. As an example, I don't know why I'm giving this example, probably because I actually just registered for the vaccine myself. So getting the first shot on Saturday, hopefully don't get too sick, but I have really old relatives that have already been vaccinated, so if they can handle it, I'm sure I can do it too. Anyway, modus ponens, guys, I just gave one example. Maybe I can simplify. If I run, then I'll sweat. I ran, so therefore I sweated. It doesn't really matter what we plug in for A and B, but any sentence that is of this form, followed by the assertion of the antecedent, will lead us in conclusion to the consequent. Okay. What's modus tollens then? Asking about that next one, modus tollens. Another one of the hypothetical syllogisms, and they're all called that because they have if-then statements in it. But how does modus tollens go? New question. Well, I'll get you started. The beginning's the same, if A then B, so that's no different. But then after that, what follows? Okay, good, thanks, Danny. So if A then B, no, you're wrong though, you're getting it wrong, that's not correct. Also, you have it wrong, Brenda, so that's also not correct. Someone needs to give me the right answer, and then we'll be all right. Oh, it's okay, but now we will correct the error. So we still don't see it correctly written though in the chat. Let's get it in there. Yeah, not B. So, I mean, the full statement would be good because just writing not B without context, the person reading this chat later might not understand what that is in reference to. So let us please write the full modus tollens correctly in the chat one time with all the premises and the conclusion. Okay, so good, Brenda. If A, then B, not B, therefore not A. It is not valid if you do it the other way around, not A, therefore not B. That's not correct, okay? Because, like, think about it. If I told you that if I'm in California, then I'm in the United States, and then follow that by I'm not in the United States, that does imply that I'm not in California. Because if I'm not in the entire country, then I'm not in one of the states either. But it doesn't work the other way. Suppose I begin with if I'm in California, then I'm in the United States, followed by I'm not in California. That does not imply that I'm not in the broader territorial jurisdiction of the whole country because there's 49 other states. So if this consequent was denied, the antecedent would have to be false, but not the other way around. And so modus tollens is not, it's not modus tollens and it's not valid if we're negating the wrong part of the hypothetical. So just keep in mind it's called denying the consequent. And if you remember these pieces of terminology, the consequent of a conditional is the then part. The antecedent is the if part. So we call modus tollens, aka denying the consequent, because the second premise denies the consequent, not the antecedent. And then in the conclusion, we get the negation of the antecedent. Okay, so good enough. Let's talk about the chain argument then. One more. That's the next question. So who can tell me in the chat what's chain argument? Chain argument. It's another hypothetical kind of syllogism. So one thing that's fair to say is that it has an if-then statement, if A then B. I'll provide you with that, but let me know how it continues. Okay, so Micah, you say if A then B, premise one. Premise two, if B then C. Yes. So where does this leave us with the conclusion? Therefore, conclusion, if A then C. Yes. So if I get vaccinated, then I can travel. If I can travel, then I will go to where do I want to go? I really want to go to Japan, to be honest. I still haven't visited there. So this could be a true example for me. If I get vaccinated, then I can travel. If I could travel, then I'd like to go to Japan. So if I get vaccinated, then I'll travel to Japan. Just a chain argument example. And keep this in mind with chain argument. Every statement is a conditional. Every statement is an if-then. So the conclusion of the chain argument is if this, then the last conclusion on the final premise line. Sometimes chain arguments can continue beyond two premises. If so, the next available premise would be a further conditional, which would just pick up where the last one left off. So it would be like if C, then D. And you would continue in the same order and fashion until you meet the conclusion, which will join the first antecedent of the first premise to the last consequent of the final premise. Okay, chain argument, hopefully that makes sense. There were a couple of random examples. I'm not sure, my memory doesn't necessarily remember if it was in this class or a different section of the same class that I'm teaching, but I noticed sometimes there were people who, on the quiz, messed up the chain argument. Like, in some cases, a person would leave the conclusion blank, or in another case, they would not write all the sentences as conditionals. It would say, like, John gets a job, first premise, and then it's like, if he gets a job, this, and then if that, then the other. But the conditional statements are all that should be in there. There should not be anything stated categorically in a chain argument without the words if and then present. So just a couple things to remember. We talked about standard form of an argument, so I'm not going to go over that again, but that is like the last review question in chapter 8. I think I mentioned it earlier when we just discussed what arguments are. Standard form, as you know, is displaying it like this visually. Each premise separated from the others, provided in a list with conclusion at the bottom, and the premises don't run on into the same line. Okay, so in chapter 1, there's a whole bunch of information to remember. Let's just kind of make short work of this. What was the Milgram? Milgram was the one with the electric shocks. It was a social psychology experiment involving false, but perceived as true to the teacher, electric shocks. The electric shocks were supposed to be delivered every time a person got a memorization question wrong. In fact, there were no shocks, but the teacher didn't know that. And what we were really studying here is how far will people go following authoritative commands, even when they're being asked to do things that are clearly wrong and out of bounds. And what happened is that 2/3 of the people did give all the shocks despite some of their hesitancy and discomfort with doing it. Reminds us that people have a tendency to follow the directives of authority, regardless of what the authority figure is asking, but good critical thinkers have more independence of mind and a better ability to break away from malevolent authority. The Zimbardo experiment, what is this? That's the Stanford prison experiment. That's the one where there were volunteers separated into the role of prisoners and guards. A simulated prison was supposed to be run for 2 weeks in the basement of Stanford University psychology department. It was stopped after 6 days because of the increasingly hostile and abusive behavior of the guards against the prisoners. And it kind of showed us again that there are powerful social forces at work when we're in a situation where some have power and others lack that same power. If people think they have social support and a role to play, then oftentimes people can descend into irrational and even savage type of behavior. So we have to be good critical thinkers to guard against those tendencies that lurk within our nature. The 3 stages of cognitive development. Okay, can anyone just write the words for those 3 stages, and then I can back that with a little more comment? The 3 stages of cognitive development goes from what to what to what. Let me see in the chat who could talk to me about cognitive development stages. Starts with what, moves on to what, and then finally arrives at what as the 3rd stage. So let's know and remember those cognitive development stages. Okay, good, Chelsea, thanks. So there's dualism, relativism, and commitment. I noticed that sometimes people filling in this answer, and it's like something that I've noticed in a couple of different classes. So I believe that there's like some, I don't know, psychology class or whatever where, or some like Wikipedia entry or something online where a person's like typing in 3rd stage of cognitive development, and in like other academic courses that people take, they provide information about pre-operational and sensory motor and all this other stuff. That has nothing to do with our class. So wherever people saw that from, I'm not saying you individually did, but some people wrote that kind of stuff. Don't use those sources. You have to use our book. You have to use our class and our notes. But yeah, so the 3 stages of cognitive development: dualism, relativism, and commitment. Dualism is when you think the truth is all just black and white and it's fully understood by authority figures. So all you have to do is listen to them, don't think for yourself, and they'll just inform you about everything in the world. Relativism is when you start to think that there's no objective truth and there's just opinions. So truth is all personal opinion, and we should treat them all equally and not judge the opinions of others. Finally, though, the third stage is commitment. Commitment is when you commit to your own views based on reason and the best available evidence. So you no longer think that you can't determine the truth like a dualist, but unlike a relativist, you also don't think that your opinions are just relatively true, but objectively true. So those are the three stages and a little description of each one. Confirmation bias. Do you remember that? Confirmation bias is just when a person only seeks out information that supports the things that they already believe. So it's a bias in favor of confirming your already established views. So like a person who's interested in a topic and they have an opinion on that topic, if they have cognitive confirmation bias rather, then they would only seek out information that verifies or reinforces their belief on the topic. So if a person thought the earth was flat and they had confirmation bias, they would dig around on all the corners of the internet to try and find any basis of support for that view and would never look at contrary evidence or information. Okay, confirmation bias is a big problem in our world because now that we have the internet, people can kind of like tailor make their sources of facts and evidence to kind of reinforce whatever it is that they happen to believe. In previous generations, without the access to the internet, you would have had more controls and central authority over what kind of information you gain access to and what can be supported by the available info. Okay, so next is number 5 of the review on chapter 1, and that says, what are the different qualities of a good critical thinker? So there's a number of those. I kind of condensed them into one question, so I just want to kind of quickly speak on it as we've already done it in our notes. But analytical skill is the ability to provide logical support for your beliefs instead of having baseless and unfounded opinions. Effective communication, that's the ability to speak, write, and listen carefully, but also knowing about different communication styles, okay? Inquiry skills, that's knowing how to collect research information and compile it for the purposes of studying a topic that you want to learn more about. Flexibility, the ability to change your mind or plans when it's called for, and being open-minded to alternative ideas and different people's opinions. Open-minded skepticism. This is a person's attitude when they only believe things that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So to that extent, the person's skeptical. But they're also open-minded, meaning that until this kind of proof arrives, they keep an open mind to all sides, not prejudging the facts or issue. So you won't believe things without credible evidence, but you keep an open mind until then. The method of doubt. This is something discussed by the French philosopher René Descartes, and we touched on that. The method of doubt was a way that he said we should try to determine what is absolutely certain. And the method of doubt says to assume that something is false if there's any possible way that it could be false. And by means of this method, he thought we would eliminate all the doubtful things, and the only things left over that remain would be those claims or ideas that cannot be doubted. In Descartes' reasoning, I think, therefore I am is the one thing that is immune from doubt, because even the 5 senses and everything we learned from sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell, he thought could be false if we were dreaming, for example. Okay, another quality of a good critical thinker is collaborative learning. That's the ability to work well with other people to find shared solutions to common problems that we face, instead of doing everything by yourself and tuning people out and not listening to their input or advice. And creative problem solving is the ability to come up with imaginative solutions to complex problems. Sometimes that means that you anticipate these problems in advance and think of already developed contingency plans in the event that they occur. And in other cases, that you are able to quickly assess a situation and improvise a solution when no other planning has already been there in place before. Okay, why is critical thinking important for being a citizen in a democracy? It's because the form of democracy that, the form of government that we call democracy is a system of government by and for the people. And it is by and for the people because it involves democratic elections. So you have to make mention, if this question were asked, as to the value of being a wise voter when it comes time to cast your vote and participate in elections. Voting and elections are the lifeblood and the heart of democracy, as I guess we've learned, if you didn't already know. So being a good voter requires that you are able to consider all the arguments of different candidates in different positions so that you can cast a vote wisely. A good critical thinker is a more reasonable voter, and therefore they can better participate in their democracy. Okay, so how can critical thinking benefit you in terms of making a rational life plan and self-esteem? Good critical thinkers are good at assigning goals and determining the best strategies to reach those goals, including setting forth what all the intermediate steps are going to be on the way towards the larger goals. So a good critical thinker wouldn't just say, I need to get rich, and that's my plan, but I don't know how to get there. They would have a plan to get there, and then they would take steps to meet all the little goals along the way, okay? And a good critical thinker also has high self-esteem. That's a benefit of being a good critical thinker, because when you're able to solve problems, reasonably make arguments, and find solutions to difficult situations that you find yourself in, it gives you confidence, and you go through life knowing that you can take care of things when things are difficult. So that's another good benefit. Now, we talk about the three-tier model of critical thinking. So there's 3 steps to that. There's experience, interpretation, and analysis. Some people confuse the 3 stages of critical thinking with the 3 stages of cognitive development. Cognitive development is the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. But critical thinking is episodic. It's something that you can do in a given instance or relevant to a specific set of facts. So when you do critically think about anything, what are those 3 steps? Well, tell me if anyone knows a brief definition of each step. Experience, interpretation, then analysis. What are the different definitions of those stages of critical thinking? So what, let's say, is the experience stage? Start with that, and then we can move on to the interpretation part. With experience, what is that part of critical thinking? Okay, so good, Brenda. One just describes what happened, what it was, not yet trying to figure out why or how it happened. Exactly. So an event happens, either something that you experienced or something in the world happens, and you just take note of it. Like we have a pandemic, or Joe Biden is the president, he won the election, or I don't know, there's increasing global warming and heat's being trapped in the Earth's atmosphere over the generations. Whatever the case is, it could be something personal instead of worldly, like your partner left you or didn't do well on a test. So whatever the experience is, you first take note of it. The second stage, interpretation, that's when you do describe, when you try and explain why or how the event happened. So now instead of just saying, my partner left me, that's just how it was, you're trying to explain why. Well, here's maybe the reason why, and you give some kind of details. Or, you know, Trump won the 2016 election, that's just what happened, 2016. And so a person could say, well, why did that happen? Maybe my interpretation is people were upset with certain policies of the Obama administration, or maybe there was economic anxiety in the Midwest of the country. I don't know. You can give your explanation. The third stage, though, is in the analysis stage. That's when you revisit your prior interpretation and you reconsider whether it's the right one or is there a better, more suited explanation for the same set of facts. Oftentimes, our first stab at explaining something is not the best because we learn things over time, we gain more information, and sometimes our emotional states that can inhibit critical thinking subside and we can think more clearly and rationally. So we owe it to ourselves to revisit prior interpretation and analyze whether it's correct or not. So that's the 3 stages: experience, interpretation, and analysis. Okay, so after that, there's a question about different obstacles to good critical thinking. And we talked about a whole range of those. So I'm just going to quickly talk about them again. One obstacle is avoidance. That's when you just avoid people that don't agree with you or information that doesn't support what you believe. So avoiding people or information that disagrees with your views, that's avoidance. You shouldn't do that, though. What's the worst that can happen if you hear someone out or read something that comes from an opposing viewpoint? At a minimum, you're going to learn how other people think, and maybe you'll understand a little bit better why people think that way, even if you don't agree, and that's not a bad thing. So we shouldn't necessarily avoid others or ideas when they don't agree with us. If we do that, we're also going to cut ourselves off from a whole bunch of possible relationships and experiences. Anger, another obstacle to critical thinking. Just getting mad and having an emotionally hostile reaction to the presentation of different ideas or information. No need to get mad. When people don't agree with you, just listen to them. And if you don't agree, then you can point out why they're wrong, but you don't have to be mad about it. You don't have to be angry. It's nothing personal when people are just talking about arguments and ideas. It's not an insult that someone else doesn't agree with you. So no need to get angry, and that's another barrier that inhibits critical thinking. Cliche. Cliche is the use of these overused common sayings and one-liner type phrases. They often are used in a conversation to get out of the conversation and to stop discussing things. So sometimes people feel like they should drop a line like, hey, agree to disagree, or it is what it is, or to each his own. When you're saying such things as these, you're sending a not subtle message that you're not interested in further debate or comment. And I guess sometimes that's reasonable enough, but the problem is that people do it too often, and after a while we just talk in cliches all the time instead of really getting to the heart of deep and important questions. Denial, another barrier to critical thinking. When you simply deny alternative ideas and views without even investigating them in the first place. If you're going to deny something, you have to look at it first and examine it. You can't deny it without consideration. Like if you were in a jury in a court of law, you couldn't just deny that the person is innocent without looking at the evidence in the courtroom. You have to make the decision based on the evidence. So denial gets it backwards. You're in a state of denial before you even investigate the claims being put to you. Ignorance. So that's when you choose to deliberately stay uninformed about certain facts so that you don't have to take a choice or take a position. Like if someone asks you, how will you vote? And you say, I don't know, because I don't understand either of the candidates or either of the positions on the bill. So I'm totally ignorant of the facts. How could I vote? The problem there is that the person could inform themselves if they were just willing to take a few moments and study the issue. So we shouldn't use ignorance as a weak excuse to avoid action or taking positions. We should take those positions and inform ourselves. Otherwise, especially with the internet, we really can't profess ignorance legitimately because the information's all out there if we just want to find it. Okay, conformity. That is when you adopt a view that you think is popular or held by the majority, just so you can fit in and not stand out from the crowd. Like, we want to fit in, we don't want to be alienated, we don't want to be loners, and etc. But the problem is that you can't just make decisions based on what's popular. You have to think for yourself. Sometimes the popular view is not right. The majority of people would have agreed with slavery and stuff in previous generations of human history. And the minority back then would have been correct if you think about the long span of time. So you owe it to yourself to think through things on your own with your own original thought. If you end up agreeing with the majority, no problem. But you shouldn't do it just because you want to fit in and you're afraid of standing out. Okay, struggling. That's the last barrier to critical thinking that's in the notes for the midterm review. So struggling is when you endlessly debate what action to take and you never come to a conclusion in the end. So it's kind of like flip-flopping back and forth, being really wishy-washy on what you would think on this question. And in the end, you say, I could never come to a conclusion. It was just too tough to decide. Well, that's a waste of time and energy, isn't it? You want to deliberate for some amount of time, for sure, but you don't want to let it go on forever with no end. Otherwise, we're not getting to the conclusion of the critical thinking process, and that's the point of expending all that intellectual labor. Okay, so one last part from chapter 1. There was discussion of different forms of narrow-mindedness, guys. And these are a sort of subcategory of barriers to critical thinking, too. One of them was absolutism. Absolutism is the thought that authority figures are all absolutely correct, and so you should never challenge what they say or believe. So always having placed total confidence in authority figures and not having the ability to challenge them or to disagree. Think about people who are like, within a cult movement, and they place all trust in the cult leader, and they don't have the power to ever deny or doubt anything that person says. You want to be able to think independently, and that means that you shouldn't grant unvarnished and unconditional support to people, even if you think of them as trusted and respected leaders. Okay, egocentrism, another form of narrow-mindedness. That is basically being egotistical, being self-centered, putting yourself above others, thinking that you're better, smarter than other people, and thinking that the world revolves around you and you're the center of everything. Well, there's billions and billions of people on the planet Earth, probably close to 7 billion right now, got a large global population. And definitely the world doesn't revolve around any single individual, certainly not just a randomly chosen person like one of us. So we have to have a little dose of humility, see the bigger picture. We're part of a big world, and we have to be willing to take advice, counsel, and argument from other people too. So even if you are smart, and there's no problem, of course, with being the smartest person in the room, you still want to listen to others and take their input. To be egocentric also places you at a disadvantage because people who know that you're egotistical will be able to flatter you and then can manipulate you. Okay, so ethnocentrism is another type of narrow-mindedness. Moving on to that. Ethnocentrism is the unjustified false belief that your race is superior or your culture, or religion. So it's the unjustified belief in the superiority of a person's race, culture, or group. There is no such thing as racial superiority. We should know that. I mean, it's obvious to anybody who just thinks about the science behind these claims. If a person thought that phenotypical traits, which determine your eye color, hair color, skin color, if they thought that that had something to do with how intelligent or how moral that you are as a human being, this is completely off base. We know that a child born today in whatever part of the world is going to grow up with the language, customs, and traditions of that part of the world. So environment is everything when it comes to the development of a human being socially. Nobody should harbor any false beliefs that because a person was born white or black or anything else, that they have an advantage or a disadvantage. That's something that we know. I think that current generation young people recognize this, but it's a fight, and it goes on to try and eliminate racist attitudes and supremacist thinking. So ethnocentrism, it's bad, it's wrong. If you think that, you're going to also not show respect to people of different diverse cultures and backgrounds, and you're also not going to be taken seriously or respected by them either, because who's going to care much about you if you're a hater of other people and their race? So anyway, that's a problem. Anthropocentrism, one more. Anthropocentrism is the belief that humanity is the center of everything, and so that the natural world and animals don't matter as much. In my mind, I don't see this as the same kind of grave error of thinking as ethnocentrism and egocentrism, these other types of narrow-mindedness, because for better or worse, you know, we are superior to the animals in a lot of ways. We're much more intelligent, we have language and technology and all of that. But to be fair, we shouldn't go overboard with only caring about the human part of the planet, because we depend on the sustainability of the ecosystem, and we're a part of nature in that sense. So if we totally mismanage the planet Earth and the living biosystem that we're a part of, then that's going to come back to harm us later. So have a healthy dose of respect anyway for non-human animals in nature, even if we don't necessarily agree in some cases that they're to be treated on an equal par with humans. And then just two more little forms of narrow-mindedness at the end. Rationalization. That is when you do something with no critical thought. You kind of do an impulsive action in the haste or heat of the moment. And then later on, you try and invent some more reasonable sounding explanation for it so that it doesn't sound like it was so random, but rather like a deliberate and intended act that was wise. So I got a really good example of this from some student answer on one of the quizzes that I gave you guys. And I thought this is great. So it was like, suppose someone buys like really expensive shoes, you know, they just drop and they want to get these shoes because they're like super cool and whatever. So they're not thinking about how much they need them or whether they already have enough shoes or whether the price point is too high. They just buy it on impulse, like gotta have it. And then later on someone is like, why did you buy those shoes? I know that you don't have a ton of extra money. Sometimes you gotta like pass on like meals and stuff. So how come you're buying the shoes? Isn't that a not so smart thing to do? Now the person, let's say, is like, well, yeah, but have you looked at the resale value on these shoes? I mean, this shoe, I could flip it online, like StockX or something, and sell it to another interested buyer, and I could probably double the price that I paid for it. So it actually was pretty smart, you know? It's like an investment thing. You buy these expensive shoes. So look, did the person really think that in the beginning? No, they're just like, gotta have it, get it now. Later on, they're being called out as doing something unwise, and so they are inventing a more reasonable sounding reason. It's not a bad reason, I guess, if that's what you had thought in the beginning. The problem is that it's a little dishonest to yourself and to others to rationalize your behavior this way. So you should bring the reasons with you in the beginning rather than coming up with them after the fact, so that you kind of make yourself seem a little more judicious and rational. And then finally, doublethink, okay? Doublethink is simply believing two opposite things at the same time. So it's a word that's taken from the novel of George Orwell, 1984. With doublethink, a person holds two contradictory beliefs at the same time. So it would be like thinking, hey, you know, I believe that same-sex marriage is part of equality and human beings should have the freedom to marry whoever they love. Oh, but I also don't want my child to ever marry someone of the same gender. I wouldn't accept that. So these things are inconsistent, right? People should be able to marry whoever, but not someone that I really know. Or a person says, you know, men and women are equal in society and they should have all the same rights and privileges. At the same time, though, I also think women should do all the household chores and women belong in the kitchen. Now, these are two attitudes that don't fit, that they don't match. They're inconsistent with each other. But sometimes people hold on to two contrary ideas at once because they can't sort of sort through which one to give up and which one to hold on to. So don't have double standards and don't have contradictions in your belief. That's doublethink. Okay, so we've gone through chapter 8 and chapter 1. Now I'm looking at the stuff from chapter 3 and 4, the more recent material. Chapter 3 is all about language. So first of all, what's language? It's a system of communication. And as we learned, it involves symbols. And the symbols used in language can be spoken, written, or nonverbal. So like words that you speak with your voice, writings that you inscribe on the page or on the screen, or sign language, body language, and tone of voice. Okay, so that's language. There are different functions of language: informative, directive, expressive, ceremonial. Informative language is just saying things that are either true or false. Directive language reminds us of the previous review we just had earlier today. That's using imperatives to direct or influence behavior, basically commands. Expressive language is language that's used to, basically, what's the right way to put it? To convey feelings or attitudes and to bring about an emotional response. So it would be stuff like song lyrics, poetry, or verse that's not designed to do anything except bring about a kind of emotional quality. And then ceremonial language, that's language used in official or formal settings like wedding ceremonies, court proceedings, meetings of Congress, and all the rest. Okay, so then there is discussion of different types of meaning and definition. We talked about denotated versus connotated meaning. Denotated meaning is like the basic formal definition of something like you would find in a dictionary. So it just states the essential attributes of the thing referred to by the word, and it doesn't come with any kind of slang or associations that make it less than literal. Connotative meaning, though, is based on past experience and associations. It's often slang usage, and they say it can be positive or negative in force. The example given in the book that I think we talked about was like the word dog, how denotatively it refers to a certain type of mammal species that's a domesticated canine, but it can be used as a slang term for a person's friends or for a person that you think is ugly or that you don't like, depending on the connotation that you bring to the slang usage. Okay, stipulative definitions. Definitions given to new words that emerge in the language. What are we going to do when a new kind of technology emerges and we have to coin phrases and words to refer to things about it, like gigabytes, internet, and other kind of social changes usher in new words like sexual harassment or date rape. Okay, and then there are theoretical definitions. Those are just definitions of scientific terms that you would find like in your science classes, force, gravity, acceleration, and all of that. Operational definition. What is an operational definition? Let me just check in with you guys really fast. What do you think that word is? What does that refer to? If it's an operational definition, what kind of definition is that one? To see what we know about that concept. Let me know. What do you think? Operational definition. It's when we try to create a standard, but maybe you can say a little more. There you go, Danny. The use of a boundary or a threshold to create standardization. Right. So one example could be the way we define obesity according to the BMI metric. There's a certain numeric value above which the definition is that that person's classified as obese. We have to have a uniform standard in medicine, so we don't allow it to be just, how do you feel, are you overweight or not? We have to have this kind of uniform boundary that gives us that kind of common definition. Another example, the age of adulthood being 18 years. This is an operational definition of adult. Driving under the influence, operationally defined as above 0.08 blood alcohol content. Poverty, defined by whether or not a person has enough income to go beyond the poverty line as set by the state or federal government. Okay, and then there are persuasive definitions. Those are definitions that are given to try and convince a person to accept a person's point of view, like saying that school is prison, or what was the other one? Taxation is theft. You know, this would be a way of trying to get someone to take a positive or negative attitude towards something based on the way we define a word. So we should always be alert to the fact that such definitions try to get us to agree with something without making a rational argument. Then criteria for evaluating a definition. So we talked about 5 qualities good definitions have. They should be neither too broad nor too narrow. So they should not be stated in a way that includes more nor less things than the word definitively refers to. A good definition is not circular, meaning it will not refer to the word itself in the definition. A good definition will state all the essential attributes of the thing being defined, not leaving any of those qualities out. And it will not use emotional language, nor will it use overly technical or obscure language, which would make it confusing to understand. Rhetorical devices. We mentioned 5. Euphemism, dysphemism, hyperbole, sarcasm, and deception. So I leave it to you maybe to find the definitions and explanations for those rhetorical devices, but we spent a good amount of time talking about them. Just briefly, euphemism, replacing a negative or neutral word with a positive one to make it sound better, like instead of dying, passing away, or whatever. Or instead of saying the car is small, or old, you say it's vintage. Dysphemism, replacing a positive or neutral word with a more negative one to make it sound worse. Like don't call it the inheritance tax, call it the death tax. Or don't call them cigarettes, call them cancer sticks. Or don't call the person pro-life, call them anti-choice. Sarcasm, the use of ridicule, irony, and taunting to deflect critical analysis or to make light of something. You know, like nice move after somebody slips and falls, whatever. There was hyperbole, exaggeration, and overstatement. Like, oh, I literally died, like when I saw how hard the test was, you know, stuff like that. And then there's deception of active or passive variety. Active deception, saying something false on purpose to mislead people. Passive deception, holding back the truth so that people don't find it out. And different communication styles. That's the last piece of note from that chapter 3. You've got aggressive communicators that just want to get their way no matter what, even if they destroy relationships. You have passive communicators that just want to avoid confrontation no matter what, even if they get exploited and people treat them like a pushover. And then you have assertive, which is the way of communicating when you have confidence and self-esteem, tell people what you want or need, but you also don't go overboard and you know when to hold back so that you don't damage the relationships. And then passive-aggressive, that's where a person wants to get their way, but they don't want to say things openly and honestly, so they resort to indirect strategies of manipulation, like talking in a raised tone of voice, knowing the person can hear it, but not addressing themselves to them, or etc. And then the last couple of things, we're coming to the end of our review session time, but I just want to kind of mention things from chapter 4. Since this is the most recent material to review, I guess is less pressing than the older stuff. But there were a few things at the end that we didn't get to cover, and I want to just make sure to mention them. So did we all talk about probability error, guys? And did we talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy too? I think we did talk about those things, right? So we got probably all the way up until number 15 on this study guide. Is that correct? Just let me know. Yes? Okay, good, Danny. So I want to just make a mention of some of the last things there. One of us, one of them error. What is that? It's written about in the book, but I'll describe it for you right now. That's a social error that happens when you divide people into categories of us and them. And then you show less respect to those that you classify as them. So how many different ways can we divide people into groups? Along what different lines? Like, for example, we can distinguish between us and them in racial terms. You know, us white people, them non-whites, or vice versa. We can distinguish between us and them. And if you think of some, please put them in the chat to add to the conversation. But I'm just going to kind of riff on this for a minute. We can distinguish between us and them in religious terms. You could say, you know, us, Christian, Jews, Muslims, them, people of different faiths. What are some other examples of how people can be divided amongst each other instead of just looking at us as all human beings? So race is one, religion is one, but those are not the only two. Can you think of other examples while we're on the topic of the us versus them error? Plenty more that I can think of. But let me hear another. Age, there you go, Brenda. Yes, us young people, them older folks, or vice versa. Us boomers, them millennials or Gen Z. That's good. So there's age, there's race, there's religion, there's socioeconomic status. Us, the wealthy, them, the non-wealthy, or us, the poor, and them, the 1%. There's educational attainment, us, the highly well-educated, the professoriate, them, the poorly educated or unschooled. I don't know, I'm thinking of all these different possible ways of dividing people. It's sad, but here's the thing. People like to belong in groups. People like to feel a sense of group identity. And that's what produces these powerful psychological drives to join with groups and to identify with them at the expense of other groups. The problem, though, is when we use this as a basis for dehumanizing others or for disrespecting them just because they're not a part of our group. So this is a big, diverse world. It's not just a homogenous world where everyone looks, acts, believes the same things. So we shouldn't disparage or diminish the value of people from different political philosophies. That's another one. Us Republicans, them Democrats, or vice versa. Us liberals, them conservatives. We should try to see the ways that we're the same beneath all of our differences. Certainly these differences matter to us, but it shouldn't be a basis for us to treat people with less respect or less care or concern. That's a main problem that's a part of the world and American society and really global society. So we got to try and take pride in the things that make us unique individuals, our heritage, our beliefs, and so on, but have respect for other people too, and be willing to build bridges. So that's the one of us, one of them error, when you divide people into groups of us and them, and then you show less respect to the people that are different from you. Okay, next up, diffusion of responsibility and the Kitty Genovese story. So diffusion of responsibility is this phenomenon that happens socially, where there's a lot of people, so there's a group setting, but in a group setting, no individual feels personally responsible to act. And because of that, no action is taken. So a famous example of this is the case of Kitty Genovese, who's named in the question, and she's in the book. Kitty Genovese is basically a woman that was murdered and attacked in a high-rise apartment building in Manhattan, New York, back in the 70s. And that's a highly densely populated part of the world with a lot of people that were also living nearby to her in the adjacent apartment units. So when she was being attacked and this intruder broke in, she's screaming out for help to anyone that could hear her. Help, help, someone help me. I'm being attacked. And here's the thing. A lot of people heard her voice and heard her cries. But because they knew that they were not the only one that was a neighboring resident of the apartment complex, everybody had this thought. Somebody else will pick up the phone, call the police, or do something to intervene. Why should it be me if I know very well that there's like 100 other people around? So because nobody thought it was their obligation to intervene, nobody did anything, and it led to her, dying and not being attended to. So the Kitty Genovese story is just like a vivid example of what can happen when people don't snap out of groupthink and take initiative to do something, even when they're in a group. Another example of it that I can see, just a little less of a kind of dark example, when I'm a professor, I am a professor, so when I do classes or review sessions like this, I could say to the whole class, who will tell me what is diffusion of responsibility? And take now the student's point of view, one member of the class like you are right now. The student can think this thought, and oftentimes does think this thought. Well, I know that I'm not the only one in this classroom, and he's asking the class for an answer to a question. So let me stay silent and wait for someone else to answer it, because there's so many of us here. It's not like he's only addressing himself to me. And so everybody has the same thought. Nobody steps up to take the initiative, and the question doesn't get answered. So eventually then the professor has to call on people, hey, do you know the answer? Picking someone out. See, I don't like to do that. I usually think that if you set the right kind of tone, the students want to participate. But at the same time, it's something that you see. I'll be like, hey, who wants to take the student evaluations back to the department? And everyone's looking around like, who else is going to say yes? So anyway, sometimes in life, you have to be that person that's willing to step up and take the initiative, even when you're in a group setting. People that are trained to respond to emergencies are oftentimes told that if nobody is assigned a task, they'll oftentimes just wait for someone else to do something and nothing happens. So if you have your wits about you and say someone starts to have a cardiac arrest, you should delegate activity and responsibilities to people like you. Call the police. You, do you know CPR? Perform CPR. You, run over and try and find someone else in another building to get more people to help us. So, once a person is directly called out, like you need to do this, they have a tendency to respond more. But it shouldn't come to that in a lot of cases. So try to take individual responsibility even when you're part of groups. And then one last thing is the Asch experiment, guys, okay? So Asch experiment, this is named after a psychologist named Solomon Asch. And he basically wanted to see what were the powers that conformity and group pressure had on the way people think and judge things. So here's the way the test was run. He had 5 people that were working secretly with him, and then a 6th individual that was not. And those 6 people, the 5 that were coached by Asch and the 1, were all placed together as the subjects of the study. So the 5 that were told to cooperate, here was the question. We had a line, say this is the standard line. Actually, I don't want to label it A. I'm just going to label it nothing. There's a line. Over here to the right, we were then shown 3 comparison lines. A, B, and C. Now, if I asked you right now, of course, it's not perfect, but I'm doing my best. Which one of these 3 lines matches the length of the standard line? Let me know here. What do you think? Which one would you pick if this was your question? Tell me which one, A, B, or C, matches this individual first line because it's the same length. I hope there's a clear answer. If you can see the board, what would you tell me if that was a question? Question again is, which line matches the length? It's C. Isn't that clear? Yeah. I deliberately made A way too long, B a little too short, and C is the same length. Okay, so they said to these 6 people, just tell us which line matches the other, which of the 3 options matches the standard. And the 5 people that were all briefed by Ash were told this. I want all of you guys, when we come to you, to give the same incorrect answer, but make sure it's the same incorrect answer and say it with total confidence, like nothing could be more obvious. So the 6th person wasn't aware of the fact that the other 5 had been given this prior instruction. So it was like persons 1 through 5, you ask them which one matches, like, oh, B, B. Definitely B, it's B. I could see it's B. Now they get to the 6th person, and the 6th person not having been coached and just thinking that that is their honest reaction, the other 5 people, what do you think their answer became? Did they go with the clearly correct answer, C, which all of you guys could see? No, most of them, 75% or more, gave the same incorrect answer that the others gave just because that was what everyone else said. Now, you shouldn't get it confused. It's not like they necessarily were thinking this. I know it's C, but I don't want to upset anybody, so I'm going to just pick the same one as everybody else. Some might have had that thought, but many of them reported that they actually started to second guess their own powers of vision. They were looking at it more closely, like, how can 5 other people be wrong? Maybe something's off with my eyes, and actually, yeah, you know what, I can kind of see it. It is B. So this is very weird because it shows you that conformity and groupthink can overwhelm our powers of perception even and warp the way that we see reality. So if that can happen in this silly little line matching example, imagine how much more easily it could happen in real things where there's things on the line. Like say you were a juror and the other jurors have all voted this person guilty and you're the one holdout and you're like, I don't know if the case was really proven in court, so I'm thinking not guilty. But if you're sitting with 11 other people that all have a different opinion, are you really going to be able to stand on your own independent powers of judgment? So the Ash experiment reminds us that with groupthink and conformity, we can even have our visual perceptual judgments distorted so much more often than can this happen in everyday life when we're dealing with political opinion or claims we hear in the media or in court of law. Okay, guys, so there's a little more, in chapter 4 that I didn't get to review with you now, but I wanted to make sure that I cover the leftover things that didn't get discussed before. For you, if you want to go back into previous lectures and watch those replays, you'll be able to see all the information. It's all in the book and it's all in our notes, so we should be in good shape. For Wednesday, I'm going to let you guys go. I know we're 2 minutes beyond time. I'm going to let you go now, but on Wednesday, just be ready to take this test at 1 p.m. You're going to be sent the test through Titanium, and you'll receive it as a blank document. Then you'll just write in all the answers and send it back to me before the expiration of the class period, which is 2:15 p.m. So until then, I'll be available through email and answer any questions that anyone might have. Anybody who's still looking for any grades for a previous assignment, let me know. I've replied to most of the students so far, but I'm always happy to take on more. So let me know that you guys are good to go, and I'll let you say goodbye, and then I'll close the stream. And we'll be back on Wednesday for your guys' midterm. So are we all good? Just let me get that knowledge from you that we're fine and good. Yeah? Okay, thank you so much then. Have a really good one, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. And be in touch if there's anything else that you do need. How many questions on the midterm? Thank you, Danny. There's going to be about 27. So it's similar to the quiz, but the only difference is that there's an expanded set of topics because quiz 1 was just on chapter 8 and 1. So this also includes material from chapter 3 and 4. And I mean, the nature of how you would write answers and stuff is similar to the quiz, but there's just a longer list of questions. So it's about 27 instead of 17. So just bring that to you with your time management. You should be fine. Okay, then. Thanks again, everyone. I'll let you go. So take care, and we'll be in touch till Wednesday. Thanks.